Thank you. All right. Welcome to our last panel of this editing conference. This is how to know when you're done editing and what to do next. uh, we would like to thank you for being here and thank our sponsor, Renaissance Press, for allowing us to provide live captions for this panel. If you want to support us or access the Discord, the links are all going to be in the chat, along with links for our panelists and for our Ko-fi if you'd like to donate. Um, Putting these conferences on is a lot of work, and we would appreciate any help that you would like to give us. And to begin, we are going to introduce our panelists for today. Please let us know your name, your pronouns, and a little bit about why you wanted to be on this panel. Emily, would you like to start?
Sure.
Sure.
So my name is Emily Collin, and my pronouns are she, her, and I wanted to be on this panel because I really feel that not only in my own writing, but when I work with my students, they can get sort of trapped in this endless loop of revision where they feel so frustrated and they feel their sort of perfectionistic tendencies coming out. And it's just challenging them for them to know, when do I stop tweaking? When do I walk away? When is good enough good enough? And then once I really am quote unquote done, what are my next steps? And then along the way, once they have started, if they wish to query or if they're indie publishing, no matter what route they take, there may be more revisions that happen. So I see it as stages. And so I just think that it's so important, and it's stuff I learned the hard way. And so that's why I thought this panel would be so much fun.
Yeah, wonderful. Pamela. Sorry, my audio isn't a little clear, I guess.
Hi, I am Pamela. My pronouns are she, her, and I had actually requested to be on like 2 or 3 different panels, but this one sounded really interesting to me because I'm actually an editor for self-published and indie published authors, and and it's just a lot of fun for me to do that for them. And so getting to discuss just, what the editing process looks like for self-published authors, and how to figure out when your book is ready for publishing and how to make it the best product that you can make it, is just a really interesting topic for me, and I could probably sit and talk about it for hours. It's
We
really
have
too
1
bad this
hour.
is only an hour long.
We'll see what we can get through. Neve or Neve.
Hi, I'm Nev Maslakovic. I write speculative mysteries, and I'm a hybrid author. I have 3 books with a publisher, 47 North, and I've self-published too. And why did I want to be on this panel? Because I've made all the mistakes. I've sent the manuscript out too early. I've held on it too long, because I didn't want to ask for feedback. So it is something that I've, thought a lot about, and kind of, interested in hearing what other people have to say, and, what tricks they use.
Well, that's what we're here for today. And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I am an author and an editor, and I do these panels a lot. So this is probably like the panel topic, this and disabilities, I guess, to talk about the most, because I work in both worlds. I'm a full-time editor, that's my income. I work with indie and trad authors, New York Times bestsellers, down to brand new indie authors. And I have 6 books published. So I sit on both sides of the table, and I can kind of give people a unique perspective based on that. So I'm always all about sharing whatever I can through my experience that I've gained for other people. Maybe something can help them too.
All right, thank you. Just so you all know, I'm Jade. I'm your moderator today. I'm also an editor. I mainly do developmental editing, book coaching for fantasy and science fiction. But I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your perspectives today. So for our first question, how do you determine how many or what types of revision that your story will need to pass through? And do you do this ahead of time or as you go, or sort of how do you think about that? Sarah, do you want to start us?
I generally, as an author, don't trust my judgment that much. So I kind of feel like everything I write needs to get the full treatment. I just go into it knowing I need someone else to make sure this makes sense outside of my brain. So I always need a developmental editor. And then for me, I'm pretty good. Line editing and grammar and stuff's really where I shine. So I'm pretty good with that part. But for me, it's developmental is what I feel like. I always just want someone to go through my stuff and make sure, does this make sense outside of my brain as well as inside of my brain? That's what I need the most of. But for my clients, I think I always tell my authors every book tells me what it needs when I get it. So I always ask for a sample, and the sample tells me, I mean, within the first paragraph, pretty much I can tell you exactly what this book needs. And then I sit down with the author and I say, if we want to proceed with this is what I think your book will probably need as we go through it. And then we kind of break down the steps based on that. I don't think there's one story across the board. I think every book kind of is its own animal. And as an editor and an author, I try to take them each as they come. Each one will tell me what it needs when I see it.
So it's almost more of a instinctual feeling for you.
Yeah, I mean, some of them you can tell they're not going to need much developmental work because they've already had that done, or the author just really has that down, that aspect. Like there's some books I get that just need copy editing or line editing or something. And then there are some that really need the developmental edit. Usually the author knows, and then I'll be able to kind of pick it up based on what I see. But yeah, I mean, each book's different. Like even for me writing, my book of Honey and Wildfires came out of me in 3 months, whereas my last book, The Necessity of Rain, took 3 years to write. So each book is different, and you just kind of have to treat them all like their own animal, because that's exactly what they are. We're all individual authors, and our books need to be treated as such.
Excellent. Me?
So once I have a rough draft, I tend to make, gosh, as many passes as it needs. Usually it ends up being 4 to 5 passes where I'm, moving stuff around, adding scenes, fleshing out characters, world building, and the passes get faster and faster. And that's kind of how I judge. The first pass might take a month. The next one, maybe 3 weeks, then 2 weeks. If I'm down to where, it takes me just a week to go through and I'm not moving much around, I know I'm getting close. Now, if I get stuck and I feel something still isn't quite working, then I reach out to alpha readers.
Mm.
And that's always very helpful. If I think it's working, I reach out to beta readers. And then kind of that's maybe 5 or 6 people. And then I see what they have to say, what's working, what's not working, and go on from there. So in
Just
terms of
for
the number of passes, probably half a dozen for that stage.
just for some of our audience who may not know the difference, do you want to just let us know what the difference is for you between alpha and beta readers?
Oh, so for me, alpha readers are other writers who will look at the big picture. The manuscript might be in a very rough shape when it goes to a fellow writer. Beta readers are my newsletter subscribers, basically, readers who, I'm very thankful that they volunteer to read the book in advance and provide feedback. So I guess alpha would be professional readers and beta would be
Commercial readers.
yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Pamela.
I really liked what Sarah had to say about each book being its own animal, because I can get the like a different trilogy or a different book, even from the same author, but it's, but each book is going to require a different sort of work depending on the genre that it's in, depending on the type of book that it is, depending on, the type of characters that the author is going for. And my big thing when I am working with clients is going through and making sure that I stick with their voice and their style, because each book is different and each author is different. And so, you want to make sure that you make as many passes as necessary, to make sure that it's readable for people, because I've been a bookworm my entire life. I learned to read at a very young age. My mom was a bookworm, still is. And, I was just basically raised around books. And my biggest issue when I'm going into an editing project is making sure that the superfluous words are gone. Like, you have this long sentence with 15 words in it that really only need 5. And so when you're editing, just going through and making sure that it's concise, making sure that it's readable. So every author may have a different number. Nev said that she makes half a dozen. Emily may make 24 passes, and Sarah may make 3. I mean, it really depends on the author. It depends on the story. It depends on the genre, and it depends on the person and the voice. So it's going to be different for everybody.
100%. Emily.
So I love what everyone has said so far, and some part of it, of what each person said has really resonated with me. So like most people here, I work as a writer, but then also as a book coach and editor, and then also as a writing instructor. I think we all probably do some of that. And so what I have realized in terms of the number of passes that something needs might depend on the individualized approach to writing the story in the first place. For example, I began what sometimes is called a pantser, but I prefer Becca Syme's term and Joanna Penn's term as a discovery writer. So I began kind of as a discovery writer. And as a discovery writer, I could more quickly write a first draft, but I was basically seeing what the headlights could show me in front of me as I wrote. I could write more quickly, but then when I got to the end, I realized that I had more of a quote unquote beautiful mess of a manuscript. And in that case, it required a great deal of revision, multiple passes, and a lot of overhaul. But I sped out the first draft more quickly. What I soon realized is that, unfortunately for me, writing that way, I very naturally leaned into my weaknesses, which at the time was a lot of kissing and a lot of banter. So my manuscripts would have kissing and banter in the kitchen, kissing and banter in the car. It was counterproductive. And I realized through writing where my weak points were. And I realized that what I needed to do was plot, that for me, that became helpful. And initially I thought, well, this is very boring. It's going to feel like writing a book report. I don't want to do this. But instead, the structure gave me freedom. Now, this is just me personally. Everybody is different. There is no right way to draft. But what I discovered was if I did that up front, I then had fewer revision passes at the back because I was figuring out what was wrong on a much smaller level, maybe an outline that was 6 pages long where I was looking at each scene. And for me, that could tell me nothing's happening in this scene. This is going off the rails. I've totally forgot about this back here. It was a lot easier for me to conceptualize like that. And I particularly found that helpful if I had dual timeline and multiple point of view where I could really look at it and see who was popping up when. What I've discovered in terms of passes is that I think a lot in terms of the editorial pyramid. So if you have someone who is really struggling with issues that are kind of what I think of as the supporting level of that pyramid, which is the conflicts are not quite there, the stakes are not visible, the characters' goals are not visible, that's going to require a pretty big overhaul because that's a lot more intrinsic to the foundation of the story than more of the top level things like perhaps the dialogue's not quite as snappy, or someone uses the same word a lot of the time, or there's too many adverbs having an adverb festival on the page, or the em dashes are proliferating in an insane sort of a way. So what I have discovered is, just like Sarah said and Pamela said, that it is so individual to each manuscript for sure, but that those manuscripts that require more and more passes are those where I get them and I think, okay, this is clear in the writer's head, but it is not so clear necessarily on the page. And a lot of the time at that point, I'll have a conversation to figure it out. So what I do with my students is I have them write their book's logline and their jacket or back cover copy first, because it's a lot easier to tell if the stakes, the goals, and the conflicts are missing at such a small level than it is in a sprawling book. Where it becomes the most challenging is if there are a lot of issues on the craft level, as well as a lot of issues in terms of the story level. Then you have a big revision. But I tend to do multiple passes with my own stuff. And then, as Nev said, it gets faster and faster as I go. And I will frequently, at some point, listen to my work, because that really speeds it up for me to see what is repetitive, hearing it in a different mode. So.
Thanks for all of that, Emily. That is very thorough. I just want to add to that, like, I totally agree what you mean about like the passes can be different depending on kind of what level you're going to and at what level of the editorial pyramid you're seeing issues. And I do say for developmental editing, like for any manuscript I get, I kind of have like 7 things that I evaluate, including point of view, whether or not you've got a dynamic character arc, plot organization, plot structure, world building, scene dynamics, all of that stuff. So if you have the criteria, it's almost less about the number of passes than it's however many until these criteria are actually hit in an appropriate, visible way on the page.
Agreed.
All right.
I want to just really quickly second what Emily said about having an outline, or that kind of writing the pitch first, or just having a little bit of structure in place, that it really does save a lot on, kind of the meandering that at least I tend to fall into, and cut down on the number of editing passes.
Yeah. And like it's not necessary to outline like crazy. You can do very, very short points, so you're not, cramping your style if you're a pantser and you want to just discover on the way.
That word outline makes it sound, like a dry process, and it's a creative process. I mean, you can, draw pictures, you can
exactly
make sketches,
whatever works for you.
My friend Lauren calls that the book skeleton.
Yes, that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, and then you just flesh it out as you write.
I love that. And I use sometimes with my students Pixar's 4th rule of storytelling, which is also called the story spine. So it relates right to the book skeleton. We don't have enough time to really look at that 4th rule of storytelling now, but I encourage anybody who wants a really simple, friendly, fun way to look at the basic structure of what your book entails. It's one of the 22 rules of storytelling that Pixar always uses, and the 4th rule is fantastic.
Indeed. All right, let's do our next question. How do you determine if or when you are finished with either a round of edits or with editing the whole book? You can speak about this from an author side or an editor side. Nate, do you maybe want to start this time?
For me, it's when the edits I'm making are just line edits. If I'm at the line editing level, then I the story is there, or I think the story is there. And then maybe it's time to get feedback and see if, if it's working the way I want it to work. Because sometimes the story will be there in my head, but it won't be there on the page quite yet. Especially for me, especially in the beginnings. Beginnings are tricky for me. And chapter 1, I just end up having to edit again and again. So, yeah, I guess it's almost an instinct as to, at least for that content part.
Mm-hmm.
The
story.
You kind
of get a feel for it after a while, know when it's not quite right.
Yeah. I think it's doing what I want it to do. Now it's time to see if that's really the case, and time to send it out to, your editor, or a
And like
friend. reader.
rewriting that first chapter especially is a thing because that's what they're going to look at. It's the first
Yes,
thing someone's going to
yes,
see. I think
yeah.
there's even a book called The First 5 Pages that's about like an editor will make a decision in a trad publishing house like on your first 5 pages. So nailing it can be a challenge.
Yeah, I think I just get too enthusiastic. I'm like, oh, so this is going to be, this is going to happen and that and this. And you kind of have to like, start maybe nearer to the top and then.
Yeah. Pamela? Oh,
Oh,
I think
you're
you have your
muted.
mute on.
I am muted. I am so sorry about
It's
that.
all good.
So how to know when you're done editing? I am mainly a line editor and proofreader. So I will typically get a book way toward the end of its life
Development.
cycle, I guess, development, writing cycle, journey to the publishing world. And so I will make usually one pass through, and, just checking sentence structure, grammar, punctuation, those sorts of things. I will usually use Control F if I see one particular word that needs to be changed through the entire document. I want to make sure that it is consistent, want to make sure that I did not miss one. So Control F is one of my best friends. I absolutely love those two keys. So I will usually make one, maybe two passes, depending on the type of work it is. I typically work with self-published fantasy authors. It's rare that a book needs more than one pass from me. So it's, by the time the author gets it back, unless they have sent it to beta readers at the same time that they've sent it to me, which is rare, they will typically get it back from me, go through, make their own changes, make their own edits, any rewrites they need to make, and then get it ready and formatted for publishing. So, my answer to that is a little bit different, probably than another author and other editors is going to be, simply because I don't see it until it's almost done.
That's fair. But that's important for people to know too. Like if you're turning something into a later stage, like a mechanical edit, you should not be expecting to get developmental feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I will occasionally leave like little notes. Like if I come across a part that is particularly funny, that makes me laugh out loud, I will leave little notes, or, I really like this character, or I really need this character to die. Please please tell me they're gonna die before the episode ends. Those sorts of things. Just little notes of encouragement, I guess. I try, if I make a sentence structure change, or if I come across something where I'm like, well, this is really just going to sound better this way, I will go ahead and make the change, but then I will leave a comment or a note explaining why I made that particular change. Of course, I use track changes, so the author, will have the option of accepting my change or not. In the end, it is the author's story. It is their work, it is their art. My goal as an editor, and I'm sure Nev, Emily, and Sarah can all attest to this, our job is not to change your work. Our job is to make your work better and to make it more marketable, for lack of a better word. That is our goal with your work and your projects and your manuscripts as editors. Whether it's developmental, whether it's line, whether it's copy, proofreading, whatever type of editing we're doing for you, we're not tearing apart your story because we hate you. So, that's a very important point to make, I think, because, some authors, I think, get kind of stuck in, I don't want to send my book to an editor because what if they tell me it stinks? Well, you're not ever going to know unless you try, so.
Very true. Mm. And Sarah.
Okay, I'm a developmental editor mostly. I work with indie authors, I work with trad, I work with small press, I edit for Grimdark magazine. I'm kind of all over. So I get books in various stages. The books I get from a publisher are going to hit me differently than the books I get from indie authors. But most of my authors are indie. I'll do numerous passes with some of them. With some of them, we do back and forth. I do it however the author is most comfortable. I get asked a lot this question: how do I know if my book is ready? That's like number one. The best way I've thought of explaining it is your book is like a lump of clay, right? And your first draft, you have this clay and you're deciding what you're going to turn it into. And that's your first draft. Your first draft, you're figuring out what the clay is going to be. And then you go through the second draft and then you're deciding I'm going to make a vase. And so you're starting to get the shape of your vase in the second draft. You're getting the elements of your story down. You're getting to know the parts of it. It's starting to take shape. It's not just an idea, it's becoming something on the page. It's becoming a thing. And every draft you do, this clay becomes more defined, more like a vase. And eventually you're going to get to a point where you're basically gilding the lily, where you're taking this vase that has all of its shape and all of its adornment, and you have your little tool, and you're just adjusting this one thing that you know absolutely no one on the planet is going to notice but you. You're the only person who's going to notice this specific detail on the vase, and man, you're taking 5.5 hours just looking at it because, whoa, that detail. Nobody else is going to notice it. And you know that. You have that dialogue because I hit that point all the time. Every author knows that. I am speaking for all of us. And that's when it's time to say, okay, I need to give it to an editor or a beta reader or someone else. When you have your vase and it looks the way you want it to look and you're focusing on the details no one but you will notice and you're picking at them for hours, that's when it's time to get it away from you. You need space from it as an author. You need to step back because it's the forest for the trees thing. You're too focused on the details. You're not seeing the picture anymore. It's time to give it to someone else. So, and I recommend betas first, always. Give it to your beta readers first because those are going to be your audience reader opinions. That's the people, your beta readers, you want them to be the people who you want to sell your book to. So you want to make sure the people you sell your book to are going to read your book and understand it and like it. That's like the ground zero. It's not perfect, but hey, do you dig it? That's beta readers, the broader scope people. And then after that, after you get all that back, you do what you want to with that. Then you go ahead and you give it to an editor and you say, hey, what's up? And the editor, I tell everyone, never, ever, 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 ever go with an editor unless you get a sample first, period. You need to know that your editor and you talk the same language. You need to know they see the same thing that you need with your manuscript. You need to know that you're on the same page. You can talk to each other. You can handle their criticism. You like what they say. And on the editor's side, I refuse to work with authors I haven't done a sample with because I need to know my authors can take criticism. I need to know they can handle it. I need to know, how are you going to react when I take your beloved chapter and redline the hell out of it? What are you going to do to me? And, because some people can take it and some people can't. And that just, depends. If you're going to send me 75 text messages, on Facebook Messenger arguing with every single thing I say, then I'm going to let you be someone else's editorial work, that's. But on the other hand, if the magic flows and it goes back and forth, then hey, why not? But that it's a relationship that goes both ways, and you should never sign on with anyone you haven't done a sample with. You need to know that the relationship can be there. You have to trust them with this thing you've spent years on and your creative work. They have to respect it. You need to know that. So yeah, anyway, there you go. That's my speech. So
and when you find your great editor, this is, from the others' point of view. Listen to them.
Yeah.
Listen, listen to what they say. Listen to what they have to say.
Yeah,
The thing that editors, we're not, like it's been said, we're not there to criticize your work. We're there to help you polish it. We're kind of story doctors. There's these things, these bones that need to be knit and the things that need to be stitched together. And that's our job. We're not ruining it. Like I tell people sometimes who come to me and I say, your book just needs another pass before I'll go over it. I'm not saying no, and it's not no forever. What I'm saying is every single one of us who writes has a book that's not ready yet. We do, because no, we don't write books that are ready for editors out of the gate. We just don't. And a lot of times it's hard to tell what stage our book is at unless we ask someone like an editor, which is where simple edits really come in handy. But you don't know that. And it's not like no forever, it's just no until it's a little bit more polished, because we all have books that needs to be polished a little bit more. It's never about saying anything sucks, because I don't think anything sucks. I really don't. If it's art and it's created, it's beautiful and it needs to be in the world, period. There's enough ugliness. So it's never, ever, ever a question with an editor that's worth their salt is this worthy and is this not? Art is worthy, the end. It's always just a matter of, is it ready for an editor right now, or is it ready for an editor in a month?
I would
Anyway,
say finding it.
I'll shut up now. Sorry.
Finding a good developmental editor is a lot like finding a therapist. Like you really need someone that you can communicate with, that you feel safe with, and that you feel safe dealing with your story with, working on it with them. Emily.
Yeah, so yes to everything that everyone has said. And Sarah, I also often use that idea of even going a little bit further to when you have your idea for the story, it's like the clay that's still in the ground and you're sort of chipping away at it a little bit when it's in the idea phase and you're not sure what the shape is going to be. And then the ultimate vision is when it becomes that vase or it becomes whatever it is. I do really think that some editors are really good with dealing with books that are in the conceptual phase, and some editors are really good with dealing with books that are the finished product. And I work both as a writing coach with the idea phase all the way through to doing proofreading. So I get to kind of see that back and forth. And I think the most challenging thing is when people I teach a revision class, and sometimes people come into the revision class really thinking they are at that stage when they are done and they just need a very quick pass through. And as we go through the curriculum and we go through all the steps and the evaluation and the tools, they kind of realize on their own, oh my gosh, I can't answer these questions yet. These things don't quite match up. I'm not there yet, right? And they're surprised to find out that they have to do more than they thought, but hopefully not devastated because the tools are also there to help. I think, in terms of knowing when you're finished with the final round of edits and knowing, when you're finished with each stage, which I think was kind of embedded in the question. For me, I'm someone who processes out loud. I process by talking with my writing partners and my critique partners. I process by talking with my beta readers. So I always try to figure out my character arcs first, my character's goals, motivations, core misbeliefs, and how they need to change. And I always kind of try to match that up with the story goal and conflict. And if I cannot do that, I go back to the drawing board. Even if you're not someone who outlines, even if the word outline sends fear through your heart, I think it's good to kind of do that sort of sketch work up front. And then I start putting it down on the page. And what I will often do is if I get stuck, I have a critique partner who's very strong in specific areas where I know as a writer, I always tend to fall down, although I think I'm getting better at it all the time, but I know it's my weak spot and it's her strong spot. So she's kind of my filter. I call her my plot fairy, and I just kind of run it through her. And when I've gotten it basically as good as I can get it, I have she is my first read. And what I often do is I will stagger my critique partners and I will stagger my beta readers. And the reason for that is I want at least one person that I trust to be coming to it fresh with fresh eyes after I have done absolutely everything that I can do. Because if you've got the one person who's like, is it better than it was? That's great. Or they'll reread the whole thing for you. That's fantastic. But they already know what's going to happen. They already have the whole skeleton in their mind because they've read your book. So I always like someone coming to it fresh. And what I usually will do after that first person that I trust goes through is I will have two other critique partners read it at the same time. And what I'm looking for is, are they both finding the same problems in the same sections? And this is sort of crucial on my journey to figure out if I'm done. Now, they may not have the same solution about how to solve it. Neil Gaiman has a famous quote that I can't exactly remember, but the idea behind it is, if a reader tells you something is amiss, something's, they are always right. If they tell you a specific way to fix it, they're frequently wrong. So I don't have to take their specific suggestion on how to solve the problem. But if two different people are telling me, there's a problem here, then I need to go back and rethink it and rework. And for me, when I know that I'm done is when I can give it back to all of those people. They all read it through, and then I give it to those fresh eyes, and they do not see any of those issues that came before. For my clients, I feel like they're done when, number one, all of their scenes are moving along without being extraneous. There's nothing there just to be there on the page. Their characters' goals and wants and needs and flaws are all tied into the overall goal of the story. The conflict is popping on page. The stakes are increasing dramatically. We care deeply about the characters, and we just, that unput downableness that's so hard to define. That's kind of how I know when a book is ready. If each chapter or each scene has got only what it needs to be in it to make me desperately want to find out what happens next, that's to me when I know, okay, this is done, this is ready. And then, of course, there are fine level sort of tunings that I'll do, like listening to my book with Voice Dream Reader to see what repeats, printing it out, maybe if I've only read it on the screen before, reading it in a different place or on a different device to trick my brain into thinking it's not mine. And then and only then, when I've done any and all of that, will I send it off, if it's my own work, to an editor. And if it's a client's work, that's when I know, okay, they're ready, because I know my clients are ready when I forget that I'm reading something that I'm supposed to be critiquing, and I just read it for the joy of the story.
That is, yes, I completely 100% agree with that. I just want to remind people to ask any questions you want in the chat. We're going to go around with one more round of answers for a question, but if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Okay, so the next question we have, what red flags or indicators do you look for that would like imply to you that a story needs further editing? And if you guys could just pick like one or two of either for you as an author, what you know you need to work on, or as an editor, kind of the most common ones you see, that just to keep our answers not exploding. Dave, do you want to start?
I don't know that I have any specific flags. I will say what helps me spot issues is taking a break from the manuscript, a month or two, if I could make that work with a deadline. And I think Emily mentioned this, or printing it out. Sometimes I'll send the document to my Kindle and read it that way. But I don't know that I have any flags that kind of repeat from manuscript to manuscript. It really depends on the story.
Fair enough. Sarah?
I think the big one I see as an editor is with clarity. With a lot of manuscripts where I see that it might need more work than maybe they're expecting to have on it. Usually it's with issues of clarity, and they can come in a lot of different ways. But my first flag of this might need more work than they're expecting is usually matters of clarity that I'll see in like the sample editor or up front. But yeah.
Okay. Pamela?
I definitely agree with Sarah. My biggest red flags are usually the extraneous words the sentences that are 15 words long when they should be 5. And, I will usually go through and, just kind of shorten those a little bit and, give the author the chance to say yes or no, on those. But that's usually the biggest red flag, is the over talkativeness in the books, because there are some times when I'm reading a book for enjoyment, or reading a book for editing, that I just want you to tell me what's going on. I don't want to have to try to figure it out. And I don't need a 15-word long sentence when 5 will do. And that's usually my biggest red flag.
Yeah, I think that kind of speaks to Sarah's points about clarity. Emily.
So really quick, some of my red flags: scenes where nothing happens, characters are just talking, the scene does not have its own clear arc, and there's no clear conflict or stakes in the scene, and the character is not changed by the end of it. That's a big red flag for me. Characters that do not grow over the course of the story, and that do not have a clear goal when the story begins, that do not have clear motivations and a core misbelief that comes from some kind of trauma, that then results in a lesson that they need to learn. That's another big red flag for me. If it's a dual timeline story, a dual POV, one being a whole heck of a lot stronger than the other, where there's not a lot of weight. So we're clearly
The
favoring one
balance,
storyline. And then I think another really, really big thing for me is I hate show versus tell, because I think it's so overused, but I think of it as like narrating versus demonstrating. So a red flag for me is when we are being sort of, as Pamela said, over explained to, instead of really truly being immersed to experience alongside the character. That is usually a red flag for me too.
Okay, wonderful. We have a few audience questions. First of all, one for Sarah. Sarah talked about samples, and this person would love a bit more detail on how that process works. How big of a sample do you ask for? Do you have a meeting about the sample, or like how does that work? Does anyone want to speak about that, specifically the people doing editing?
Okay, do you want me to go first?
Yes, please.
Okay. I require samples because I don't want to work with people unless we both know that we work well together. I do look at editing as a relationship, and so that's something that is important to me, is knowing that we can establish one. For the sample, I usually tell people, I've kind of moved on this over the years. I've evolved. I used to do just a few pages. I'm up to now, I'm saying just send me a chunk of it. I just want like a bunch of your book. I want to look through it, because I've had people edit their first 5 pages or so. So they're really, really polished. And then after page 6 is like, whoa, huh. So I have learned over time, I need a lot more than that. So
You
I've
have like a
started
minimum
asking.
level.
I've started asking people for at least a chapter. If I generally know what kind of writer they are, then I'll just do like a chapter. If I'm a lot more uncertain about you, I need to see the whole book just to look through it.
Okay.
I just need to scroll, because I've seen some stuff, is all I'm saying. So, but for me, that's just like insurance. It's just, I just need to know what's going on with the whole thing. Like, is it the first chunk? Because of the rest of it, I'm a lot less of a stickler on the actual page length. I just need to know page 6 isn't going to scare me.
Fair
That's
enough.
it.
Emily, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I, just for reasons of time and feeling overwhelmed, I will ask for the first 5 pages, but I always worry, Sarah, that page 6 will be the proverbial hot mess. What I have started to do as well is to ask people for a synopsis and a pitch if they have it. And I will say your synopsis doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the 1 page that everybody asked for. If you don't have a synopsis, if you have an outline, because there's also some red flags for me personally that I don't feel comfortable working with. And if I have a synopsis, then I can see, it can be a messy synopsis. Like I said, I'm not looking for like agent ready. I think that scares a lot of people. It could be 4 pages long, it could be 5 pages long. I just want to understand, where is this story going, and is it going to take a turn that for me is not going to work, or something that I'm not comfortable working with. I put a lot of the things that I'm not comfortable working with on my services page, but I just like to be sure. And then I do that 5 pages, and the question about, do I have a meeting or just send back an editorial letter? I don't do either. I do track changes on the manuscript, but I try to give a true flavor of what it is that it would be like to work with me. So I make sure to say, oh, this really made me laugh, or think twice about this, or oh, this made me so sad, or beautiful line, but also say, okay, let's look at why are we, 3 pages in and I still don't understand where we are. So I try to give a true flavor of what my voice is like when you're working with me, so that people hopefully have a sense of that. And I feel like you can also tell a lot by how people react to that. As Sarah was saying earlier, whether people can take constructive criticism. I try to have my true editorial voice present on the page. And if they come back and are, very confrontational about it, then probably that's not going to work. But if they're like, oh, I really love this and here's why, or I meant this, but I guess this didn't come across, then we can have a dialogue. And like Sarah said, it is a relationship at that point.
Pamela, Nave, do you have anything to add to that?
When
I-
I,
Go
now
ahead.
that I started talking, go ahead, Nev.
No, go ahead, because you're you're an editor, so this is your type
When
of question.
when I do a sample for somebody, I don't do it very often, typically because the book is so close to publishing. But when I do a sample, or if an author asks for a sample, I will usually ask for about 3,000 to 5,000 words,
That's about what I do.
which is typically the first, I would say, 2 to 3 chapters, typically. So I can get an idea of what the writer's voice is, what the writer's style is, what their characters are like, what their characters' voices sound like. And so that when I am doing the full edit for them, I'm not messing with any of that. Because that's the biggest thing that you want to make sure that you don't do when you're working with an editing client, is you don't want to mess with their characters' voices. Just don't. I know I am
Absolutely.
preaching to the choir here, but that, these are people that authors have lived with and created out of thin air, from the depths of their imagination. And they have lived with them for years, and all of that, and they are very close with them. And so you want to make sure that you're getting enough that you can get a sense of who these people are, and also what the author's voice and style is like. But you're not getting so little that you can't give them a sense of what your editing style is like as well. And like what Emily was saying, I use track changes as well. I will use the little notes, comments, and just give them a sense of what my editing style is like. So that if they don't like it, or they do, or whatever, then they can make that informed decision of whether they want to move forward with that working relationship.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Nave?
I was going to say, from the client side, it's good to always know what kind of edit you're asking for. Is it a content edit that you're asking for? Is it a line edit, a proofread? Because you might want different editors for those things. You probably won't have one editor do all 3. And then the other thing is to ask, to agree on a deadline in advance. What works for you, what works for them.
Absolutely. Another question from the audience is, does the protagonist need a traumatic backstory? I don't know who wants to try that.
I'll try it because I think it came from something that I said.
Okay.
And I think it came from when I said that thing about the core trauma leading to the core misbelief. I think that's where that question came from. So I just want to qualify. When I say trauma, it doesn't have to be a true and real awful trauma. What I believe is important, and the other editors might, or authors might not agree, so I'd be curious to see. I always feel like what works best for me, and this is less the case sometimes with two genres, mystery and thriller, because with mystery, we're most concerned with, are we going to solve the mystery? With thrillers, it's like, are we going to catch the killer? Sometimes heists are sort of the same way, right? But genres that don't lead into that, where there's a great deal of character development on page, what works for me a lot of the time is some version of your character starts out in the story and they want something. They want this something so badly. They want this thing so badly that it's enough to carry the story, and they're working to get it. But there is a gap between what they think they want, what they do want, and what they really need to heal and become the best version of themselves, right? And so for me, I always look for, what do they want? As their goal. Why do they want this thing? That's their motivation, right? Then I'm looking for, what happens if they don't get it? That's your story stakes, right? But that's what's happening on the outside. So then I look inside. What's happening inside this person? And if your character is a-okay when the story begins, and they're well adjusted and everything's cool and all the relationships in their life are awesome and their choices are stellar, they've already done the work of the story. We don't need to, we don't need to spend that time with them, because part of the joy of spending time with characters is watching them grow and change and learn and be flawed, and then figure out, still be flawed at the end, of course, but figure out what was holding them back in life so they can do what they really need to do. And so in order for that to happen, they need to be getting in their own way. And for them to be getting in their own way, I think they need some kind of core misbelief about how the world works. So a simplistic version might be, if you have someone who no one has ever really stuck around for in their life, and maybe one particular set of people have left them, then you're going to have a person who believes, it's not good to get attached to people because everybody leaves in the end, and they're going to live their life completely that way. And in the end, they need to learn, nope, it's worth taking some risks, and some people are worth sticking around for, right? So it doesn't have to be as traumatic as that, but I'm always looking for, what does a character believe that's flawed about how they should move through the world or how the world works? And by the end of the story, how have they grown and changed and evolved so that they can get what they want? They can be the best version of themselves. I don't think it needs to be traumatic and terrible. I just think it needs to be personal. It needs to be important to them, and it needs to matter to them, and it needs to have shaped them, so that by the time they get to the end of the story, we see how they've overcome whatever was holding them back at the beginning. And that's the joy for me in fiction, of watching characters learn and grow and overcome.
I just want to add to
Can
that.
I hop
Trauma
in?
doesn't have to be like objectively horribly traumatic. It just has to be the worst thing that character or that person has experienced. We also are getting a little short on time.
Okay.
Sarah.
Yeah, I kind of feel like stories get boiled down way too simplistically in some ways like that. I talk more about an emotional landscape. I need to know that the character's emotional journey is going to work in conjunction with their exterior journey. And as a writer, I don't write stories that are based on normal narrative tropes at all. Not at all. I don't have villains. I don't have journeys, like nothing. And that's a very conscious decision I made as an author that has been very hard, but it's been and as an author who breaks a lot of rules like that, I've learned to look at story a lot differently as a result. It's not always about those kind of journeys, and a lot of the time as an editor, it's about fostering whatever journey the characters need to go through. I think the issue isn't necessarily trauma. The issue that I look for as an editor is making sure the character's emotional landscape, the journey they go across on an emotional plane, matches that on their external one. And I will ask my authors all the time, if this scene was a painting, what would I be looking at? Paint me the picture, show it to me, bring me into the scene, let me feel it. It's not always about the end journey of the character's arc. Sometimes it's just about that scene and that moment and deepening it and making it real, making that emotional landscape really sing.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I do think that this also does tend to vary based on genre and writing style so much. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that's absolutely true what you're saying. So, you know, depending on your style of writing, what you're trying to get across, for example, just to go extreme, literary fiction is very non-tropey. It doesn't do any of that stuff. It can immerse so fully in characters. It doesn't have to have a happy ending. It's a very different sort of a thing. And I also, two of the things that you said are two of the exact same things I will tell my students and my clients as well. Paint me a picture is one of them. I say it all the time. Immerse me in this on page. And then also making sure that the external, which is plot, and then the internal, which is character, are wedded together. And it doesn't matter what genre that you're writing, and it can be more tropey or less tropey, more pronounced or less pronounced, more actiony or less, but they do have to dovetail with each other, because that's what causes your narrative drive and flow to work.
Thank you so much, Emily. That is, yes, 100%. We are getting down to the end of our time, and if I didn't fully get to cover everything we wanted to, but if everyone has more questions, please feel free to move over to the Discord when we're done. And we're just going to take our last couple minutes and go around and let all of our panelists tell us one more time where you can find them online, and maybe give us one last sort of kernel of wisdom about knowing when we're done. Who wants to go first? Nobody? Or maybe pick
I
someone?
guess I will.
Pamela.
I am Pamela Wilson. You can find me at thepickybookworm.com. I saw that they put our links in the chat, so you can see how it's spelled and everything. And all of my services, my blog is there, links to my podcast, basically everything is all in one place. Super easy to find. You can also follow me on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, won't do it. Giggle if you want, don't care. I won't ever call it X. But you can follow me on Twitter at Picky Bookworm. Please come join me. Come hang out. I would love to hook up with you guys. So thanks.
Dave?
So I'm Nev Maslakowicz, she, her. I am www.nevmaslakowicz.com. I'm also on Substack, nev@substack.com, I think is what it is. That's my newsletter. I'm also on Mastodon in the Wondering shop there, nev@wondering.shop, I think is what it is. I might have to type these into the chat, but please, yeah, you know, drop by, say hi. I'm always happy to chat.
Sarah?
I'm Sarah Chorn. You can pretty much find me online anywhere as my name, just Sarah Chorn. Just look me up, I'm there. My website is sarahchornedits.com. I forgot my last book for,
Pretty.
yes, thank you for pimpage reasons. So there's my last book. I don't know, what else am I supposed to say? I'm not that interesting.
Anything you want
I
people
don't
to remember about how to know when they're done?
just trust your gut. And if you start dwelling on those little tiny details that nobody but you are going to notice, it's time for you to get the book out of your brain. Go give it to someone else and go golfing or watch a movie or, rearrange your cupboards or knit something. Go take a vacation for a minute and think about other things. And you'll like it. It'll be wonderful. And your book will like it too. Trust the process. You'll be fine.
Thanks. And Emily?
Yeah, so I'm Emily Collin. So in my writing life, I write what I call like swoony books with a supernatural edge for adults and teens. Basically, there's kissing and there's a hint of the supernatural. I am there. So I'm hybrid published. So you can find my books basically wherever books are sold, I suppose, but my adult books are published traditionally, and then my young adult dystopian romantasy trilogy is self-published, and so I love to sort of be on both sides of that. I'm Emily Collin Books on most platforms online, except for Twitter. And my website is emilycollin.com. And my editorial services are there as well as my books. And then in terms of what to leave people with, I really feel like don't get so frustrated that you feel like your book will never measure up to that beautiful image that you see in your head and just kind of toss it away. Realize that for all of us, when we have that beautiful, wonderful idea for a book, we are always trying to live up to this impossible ideal. And that if you become so hung up with getting everything absolutely perfect, you're never going to be able to let it go. So when you go through all the steps that Sarah talks about, and then you feel like you are ready, at some point you do have to let it go into the world. And if you're independently publishing, then there comes this moment that I truly believe where it's not yours anymore, it becomes the readers. And the same with traditionally publishing, although there are more gatekeepers there, you're in conversation then. And so I do have to take a certain point in my head where I say, okay, I'm handing this over. And this is going to be about the conversation that happens when readers bring themselves to the work and not so much about what I intended individually. And my ownership kind of diminishes. So my biggest takeaway, I think, would be like, do the best that you can with your manuscript. Don't be so anxious that you can't show it to anyone because you're afraid of the feedback that you'll get. But when you do get that feedback and you do your best to incorporate it and you really think that you're done, let it go because it will never be perfectly perfect. It is a rule of editing that something can be proved 50,000 times by the smartest people in the world. And then somehow you're going to find a missing letter A on, chapter 5, page 1. And that's going to have to be okay. And you won't be less of a writer because of it. So do your best, but try your hardest not to let perfectionism and anxiety get in your way.
Excellent things to remember. Thanks everyone for all of your answers today, for all of your perspectives and opinions. We continue this in the Discord chat, of course, because we are completely out of time. Thank you.
This panel is a recording from the event Storycrafting Sessions Editing, a one-day virtual conference hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group in partnership with Renaissance Press. The Weeknight Writers Group is a social enterprise dedicated to providing affordable and accessible events for fiction writers. Renaissance Press is a Canadian publisher dedicated to uplifting marginalized voices. You can find out more about Weeknight Writers at weeknightwriters.com, and you can find out more about Renaissance Press at pressesrenaissancepress.ca.